Well, hello everyone. My name is Ben Bowler from Unity Earth, and it's a great joy and pleasure to be sitting down again with Lynnaea Lumbard. Lynnaea, welcome to Peace Week.
Thank you so much, Ben. It's wonderful to be here.
Lynnaea and her husband Rick, like so many, wear many hats and involved in multiple initiatives and initiating their own projects and supporting so many different projects, as well as being a sponsor for Peace Week and for World Unity Week, for which we're deeply grateful. And we know Lynnaea and Rick do an incredible amount to support evolutionary leaders and so much of what is emerging and evolving on the planet at this time. So, first and foremost, to you, Lynnaea, and to Rick, thank you for all the good that you do and all the good that you empower.
You're welcome. It's
What?
um, part of my work is to support the new story where it's occurring. And I feel Peace Week and the work that you've been doing, Ben, is Ben and others, John and a whole crew, is really helping to create a movement.
Yeah, thank you, Lene. With so many, everybody has their role. Everybody has their contributions. There's so many beautiful things. This week's been amazing. We've been consecrating the Pyramid of Peace down in Ecuador, the opening of the House of Hope in Poland, incredible storytelling coming out of Africa and the refugee camps in Uganda. It's had such a richness to it. It's been wonderful. And one of your key initiatives, of course, is Great Transition Stories. And you're also connected to news stories as well in a big way. So, Lynnaea, there's something about story which really you love, and you have so much to offer us about the power of story in our time as a force and a tool of transformation.
Yes, I probably came into the awareness of how important story was way back when. I'd like to read a quote by Thomas Berry. It was 1978. So this has been going on a while. It's all a question of story. We are in trouble now because we are in between stories. The old story, the account of how the world came to be and how to fit into it, sustained us for a long time. It shaped our emotional attitudes, provided us with life purpose, energized action, consecrated suffering, integrated knowledge, and guided education. We awoke in the morning and knew where we were. We could answer the questions of our children. Now, when you think about how long ago that happened, that he wrote about that, we're in a different place now in relationship to changing from the old story and the new story. He was right at the very, very, very beginning. And a lot of my work has been focused around the Great Transition, which I don't think it takes much for any of us to recognize that we are in a great transition. You earlier were talking about, just 2000 or 2020 being kind of a real key turning point. The pandemic took the entire world into a new place of being. We had to do different things, the priorities, they're still being jumbled. The amount of transition that's happening feels like it is accelerating. And so part of my work has been to name great transition stories along with my partner, Dwayne Elgin. In that, we created the Great Transition Stories Wiki 10 years ago, and then converted it to a website that I am currently remodeling and trying to get a lot of this newer information that's happened in. And I think we have to start with that story is fundamental to who we are. There's a quote about the world is not made up of atoms, it's made up of stories.
Mm-hmm.
Story is fundamental to who we are, what we think about, how we behave. It's sort of like being a fish in water. We swim in an invisible field of stories all around us, whether we know it or not. There's a wonderful cartoon years ago with you see the water and you see two fish going up like this, and one of them's pointing down there and said, "That stuff's stupid." They're trying to explain water to a fish. Stories are like that. They shape us, guide us. They give meaning and purpose. I loved the part of the quote where Thomas said, "Consecrate suffering." In the sense that certain of our stories consecrate, like the story of Jesus, consecrates suffering for a greater purpose. Stories the filter through which we perceive and create our reality. It's how we teach our children, pass on history, communicate our beliefs, and our understanding of how the world works. And basically, it's become time to change our human story. And this is really the place I feel that we're in the most now. We've been taught for generations that, we're survival of the fittest, and it's dog eat dog, and selfishness, and competition, and if I win, you lose. And that is a very old, dysfunctional story. But trying to move to the story of that we are much more than that as humans. And to me, what I'm trying to work on is reimagining the story of what we are as humans. Because if we think of ourselves as a much bigger being, wise, one of the stories that we work with in Great Transition Stories is growing up. If we think of humanity itself as growing up, becoming another kind of being. Barbara Marx Hubbard talked a lot about this. Many different people, and certainly evolutionary leaders, whether it's Homo Universalis, or a friend of mine wrote a book called Holo Sapiens. And we're starting to hear the words that are moving us to think of ourselves differently. One of the stories, we have a whole website of kind of our fundamental ideas about the universe, like that we are living in a living universe, and that stories matter, and that we are in a great transition. Those are all kind of fundamental. This is where we start. And then we look at all of the ways that change happens. And these larger stories of change. Years ago, I felt like I was falling apart. I was working on my dissertation, and it felt like everything was just discombobulating, and my relationship went out the window. And I called up. I was looking for a Jungian analyst or somebody that could help me, and I reached Jean Shinoda Boland, who's just a kind of a wonderful teacher and guide, and she said, "Do you have the book Descent to the Goddess?" And I actually did. I had it on my bookshelf, but I hadn't read it. Wow. And it's the story of Inanna. It's the oldest myth recorded in Western civilization. It was, on stone tablets. And it's about going into the underworld and being stripped. And we've all had this experience to a certain degree where it just feels like nothing's working, everything's falling apart, new identity, blah. Yeah. And I thought I was going crazy until I read this myth. And I went, wait a minute, this pattern has been in the human collective for 4,000 years. And it just gave me comfort and a way through it, and how to get through those places of deep pain. And the birthing story is like that. Sometimes when I'm trying to write and figure out what goes next on the website, I feel like I'm being squeezed and pulsed. It's like when you're in the birth canal. If you know you're in the birth canal and you're being born, it's much easier to just kind of hang in there until it pops out, and it does. And the birthing story also tells us about how to birth.
Yeah.
And it also tells us how to midwife the birth. Because, whether or not you or I know it, we are midwives of something being born right now.
Yes.
So it gives context.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the story of initiation, the hero's journey, all the trials and tribulations. If we look at humanity doing that, humanity going through a rite of passage to become an adult, where would we be in that story? That I used to have people in my groups, I'd say, okay, what story are you in? Where are you in it? Because if I look at the story of initiation, we are in the period where we are having to face our collective shadow. It's, whether it's Putin or Trump or the anger and hatred that we're having against each other and all the killings and the shootings, we're having to deal with that part of our humanity, get through it,
Mm-hmm.
become a more whole human.
Yeah.
So that's a start.
That is an amazing start, Lynnaea. I mean, I love both the passion for stories and also the deep wisdom that you're sharing, that they really do make up our reality as sentient beings. We really live in stories, we trade in stories, we exist in stories. That's really magnificent. That's a great framing. And the transition story that we're living in right now, I mean, it is tumultuous, as you've laid out. And there are some beautiful things that are emerging, and not to say that the falling away and the pain and the suffering and the grief and the loss and that whole process that you went through as an individual, that we all go through as an individual. In some way, we're going through that as a whole planet, all right? These days that we inhabit. And yes, we spoke offline about 2020 being kind of a year of turning. We may not see it, or our historians may not see it until sometime in the future, and then look back and realize and recognize that if we have to draw a line about where something, really everything started to shift, the way we work, the way we live, the way we travel, so much, and this unrest that is around the globe about the way things are, and the unrest about the way we've been doing things, like you talk about the might is right as an old story, and the win-loss zero-sum game as an old story. We're inventing new ways. I mean, if you look at, and I know you're close to the evolutionary biologist David Sloan Wilson with the whole work on altruism, and all of this is concurrent at the same time as this great turning back to indigenous wisdom, which is happening in our time, and a recognition that we, in the European Enlightenment lost something that we used to have, and in other, that's a big story itself. So, but just that it's all converging around this time. And, there are some new things that are arising that I feel and we feel are also part of these great transition stories, Lynnaea. And I know one of them is the unitive narrative. It was called the unitive new narrative, now just called the unitive narrative, and it's a beautiful work by Jude in the UK and so many others, to put this idea together of, can we have a framework, like you said before, about how
Yeah.
stories connect. Stories connect. They give us a common framework. They give us a common arena in which to live and relate. And so Dr. Jude Caravan and Bob Atkinson and many other or co-authors put together this unitive new narrative, or this unitive narrative, as a way to build cohesion and as a way to offer almost like a common operating system that so many of the different groups and initiatives and transformational organizations can relate back to and say, hey, we're operating from this common operating system. And we've seen through the evolutionary leaders and the synergy circles of the evolutionary leaders, many of them have already adopted the unitive narrative. And so it's had a really good beginning. But in some senses, I mean, you see it in the universe story, has been championed by Mary Evelyn Tucker and many others. This idea of our universe story, which the unitive narrative captures, this is a part of a new story. It's a story where everything belongs, a story where everything is connected, and a story which gives incredible meaning and purpose to the human existence. How do you see, say, the unitive narrative in terms of its relationship to this idea of a great transition story?
Well, I started working with Brian Swim and Mary Evelyn many years ago, and that was kind of the middle part of developing what is a unitive narrative, so that we begin to think about where we're going. What are we reaching for? Because the unitive narrative gives direction in addition to all of the other things that you mentioned. That even if we are not feeling together in unitive, it gives us, it's starting to define the new story. Now, part of what, I mentioned the first two parts of the basic principles and then how change happens in all the different ways that it happens. But the third step is start to name, where is it happening? Where is the new story already happening? And it's happening in, all of those quadrants. You showed me a picture, and I think many of the people seeing our interview will have been in the last 7 days of all of the areas where we need to work and grow. Those are all emerging new stories, like the stuff about soil that we've discovered in the last period of time is just amazing. And, healthy water, well, that goes kind of without saying. I grew up in Maine where you could drink the water out of streams. That is no longer possible. But these 7 things are what we need to go ahead. And so I've been highlighting like the comfortable shelter and eco-villages and all of the efforts for new kinds of communities gathering. And there are a number of new stories. They're happening everywhere. They're happening in governance. You were talking earlier with me about EcoGovernance. There's a lot of new models about governance that are not patriarchal.
Yeah.
And a lot of work with that. We have really dear friends in the EL community and others that are working with gender reconciliation, a whole new way of the masculine and the feminine. Now that coming together, that actually is one of the steps in a shamanic initiation or in the hero's journey or in the Jungian individuation process. You have to come to terms with balancing the masculine and the feminine. And then we have all the new money systems that are coming together and new kinds of investing and new kinds of philanthropy. And it's in food. Just about every corner that you can think of is an emerging new story.
Yes.
And if we can move on just a little bit, that's what got me really excited about the Holomovement. And I read some of Immanuel Kunzelman's writing on that, and it was like vibrating, like, yes, yes. And it's like when you hear somebody say something that you already know.
Yeah.
But but it hasn't been articulated. So to name the Holomovement, it's like, whew, we're all in this together. It's going somewhere.
Yeah.
I wrote a little piece for a spotlight that I'm doing in the Holomovement book that's coming out. The Holomovement gives us and our work a name, a form, a direction, and the kind of relief and safety we feel when we know others have our back and are working alongside of us. We don't have to be doing the same thing any more than the heart and the lungs and the brain have to be doing the same thing to support a thriving body. Our calling is to co-create a thriving body for humanity, which can only exist in a relationship of care and partnership with a thriving earth. It will take all of us integrating our own initiations, honing our own gifts, and coming together in harmony to build human communities in patterns of collaboration and compassion.
Oh, it's beautiful, Linnea. That is what a beautiful commentary on this emerging holomovement. That really is exquisite. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's beautiful.
Well, I feel it is, you mentioned it to me, well, it is a new story. Well, yes, it is a new story. And as I was feeling into, what it is to name something, I've done a lot of work with a system called voice dialogue, which helps individuals kind of find all the different parts of themselves and be able to step outside of them, to not be taken over by, the hurt child or the swordsman, or, to have some awareness of a larger pattern, which is what I think story does. And I used to have people find what were they stuck in, and to name it, and then you have the capacity to step outside of it. And that's what the Holomovement story gives us, is, we can see we are all in this story, each doing our part to create a new human body, or a humanitarian body. Sometimes I don't even know if that's a word, but it's one.
Sounds good. I like it.
And I was struck by the work of Bruce Lipton, and as some work that we've had on our website now for 10 years, of how evolutionary biology progresses from a bunch of little particles that come together to form a cell. And then there's lots of little cells around, and they come together to form a multicellular organism. And there's this movement of, and he talks about it as the particles, when they come together, there's a membrane that forms. And the membrane is actually the brain of the cell, not what we think of as the DNA. It's where, if you think about it in a cell, it's where the outside nutrients and stuff interchange at that edge. And what I'm seeing with the Holomovement is, it's like we have a membrane for this movement that we are in, that is giving us a greater intelligence.
Wow.
Particularly as we recognize it. And then, what cell in the body are we? Are we teeth cells, or throat cells, or blood, or lymph, or as if we could do without some of those?
Yes.
I mean, that's what, kills me when people, want to go monoculture, whether it's with people or with plants. Yeah. It doesn't create a healthy ecosystem. It eventually dies. You have to have all of the different parts to make it into wholeness.
Beautifully expressed, Lynnaea. Beautifully expressed. Yeah, and that really is the essence of the Holomovement. I had the pleasure and privilege of interviewing some people for the anthology that's coming out. Patricia Ann Davis from the Dinet people, and John Cobb, the process thinker, process theologian, and a friend in Delhi, Dr. Ramesh Bijlani, who's a devotee and a teacher of Sri Aurobindo's works, and looking at the coherence between even ancient systems going back thousands of years and Western philosophical traditions, Eastern philosophical traditions, and how they all point to what David Bohm discovered through his material science, which is really just extraordinary. So the origins of the term Holomovement between the implicate order and the explicate order was a great learning for me. And then to really have a deepening understanding of how, as you've just beautifully expressed, that can be and is applied to the work that's happening on the planet right now, the intelligence, the connection, the evolutionary vector of where we are collectively going, it does inspire confidence and it does inspire a kind of a peace and a trust, which is tremendously valuable at the individual level and in the work we do together. So definitely struck me that the Hollow Movement and what you're doing, Lynnaea, as a great transition story, have a tremendous resonance for our time. So certainly very excited. I want to just also note that the graphic I showed a few moments ago is the seven core needs, which is from EcoGovernance, and that's also that's launched in Peace Week, the seven core needs. So it's a new story as well that's come out, but it's been years in the making. Dr. Shirley Ostroff has been creating and developing that with Jan Golding for a decade now. It feels like this is the time for the
Yeah.
birthing of these great, new unitive narratives, the great transition stories, eco-governance, the hollow movement. This is part of the landscape and they're here to stay. This is here to stay. And this is part of the new, which is coming through. It's not replacing the old. It's not even necessarily bothering with the old. It's just going into what's new and emerging. And it's tremendously exciting. It's tremendously exciting. I think your work of naming, the power of stories, the importance of stories, and at this transitional moment, is seminal work and very, very important to what we do. And I love that analogy of the body, the humanitarian body.
Humanitarian. Yeah.
Humanitarian body. I like that. I love that. So that is, what as we each, contribute what we can and receive what we need in that system of reciprocity that allows the exchange and the flow of energy and nutrients in the system so that there's
Right.
vitality. So
Right.
that there's vitality. And I think that that's becoming in beautiful ways. And we're all learning to give and to receive and to be an effective cell. And I think that's a really, really beautiful story, Lynnaea. So it's been great to be here with you in Peace Week. Thank you for everything you do to support us as a team. These events are not one-off events. They are flowing from one to the other, to the other, to the other. And now, of course, we're preparing for, in December, we'll be enlightening our way together and then into Martin Luther King, John Rahm, what he's doing with the 40 Days of Peace Through Unity, which has, the good news, it's been blessed by 3 years of financial support from that founding body. So there's good things happening in the system, and I think it's in March next year. There's a gathering of the Hollow Movement in Sedona. There's some really powerful, beautiful, and amazing things, and then we're getting ready for the 99 Days of Peace Through Unity again next year, from World Unity Week to Peace Week. So there's so much goodness that's beckoning us forward. Lynnaea, what would be your kind of final closing remarks as we've taken the time today to look at the great transition stories that you're connected to, the Hollow Movement, eco-governance, seven core needs, unitive narrative? There's some big, powerful stuff here.
Well, I think what's exciting is that many of us have intuited this for years. And what's exciting is that the physical science is catching up and finding that it's true, what we already knew. So it's a real confidence booster to go, I knew that all along. And now there's scientific proof. It's happening. It's coming together. So it gives me a lot of hope for the future.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. And thanks to Rick as well. And thanks for sharing your beautiful stories here in Peace Week. And we look forward to more to come. Thank you, Lynnaea Lumbard, for being with us today.
Thank you. Such a delight.